At 78, Linda Ronstadt, the legendary voice behind a genre-defying career that saw her dominate rock, pop, country, and Latin music for decades, finally let go of a burden she had quietly carried for years, naming the 7 musicians she couldn't stand during her time at the top of the music industry. A list that has remained secret for over half a century despite her proximity to nearly every major player of the classic rock era. Ronstadt, whose graceful presence and operatic vocal control earned her acclaim from critics and fans alike, had always kept a firm boundary between her artistic integrity and the often ego-driven circus of the music world, preferring to focus on craft over conflict, collaboration over competition. But in a revealing and at times fiery conversation from her home in Tucson, Arizona, where she now lives quietly following her diagnosis with progressive supranuclear palsy, a condition often misidentified as Parkinson's disease, she spoke frankly and unapologetically about the people who left a sour taste in her memory, not for petty reasons or tabloid fodder, but for what she described as toxic egos, artistic dishonesty, or simply irredeemable personalities. The first musician she named, to the surprise of few who knew her privately, was Jim Morrison, the mythic and often polarizing lead singer of The Doors. Ronstadt recalled an incident at a late 1960s music festival where Morrison, reportedly intoxicated and increasingly paranoid, wandered into her backstage area and began making derogatory comments about girl singers, dismissing her talent and accusing her of being a commercial puppet for the record labels. She described him as a walking performance of self-destruction whose legendary status obscured his obnoxious, often predatory behavior around women and whose poetic lyrics, while sometimes brilliant, were overshadowed by his obsession with his own myth. Ronstadt said she saw him as a cautionary tale, someone who could have made an impact through innovation but instead drowned in his own ego. And though she respected the musicianship of The Doors, she felt Morrison was more interested in seducing chaos than creating anything of lasting value. The second name she revealed was Don Henley, a far more shocking inclusion given their shared musical history. Henley and Glenn Frey both served in her backing band before forming the Eagles, and it was through that early exposure that the band gained their first platform. However, Ronstadt offered a sobering account of Henley as someone she viewed as talented but ultimately driven by an icy ambition that made meaningful collaboration difficult. She recalled sessions where Henley's need for control bordered on tyrannical and where his approach to women in the studio reflected what she termed a deeply ingrained chauvinism masked as perfectionism. While she credited him with being a meticulous arranger and strong lyricist, she said his inability to acknowledge others' contributions, his dismissiveness toward female creatives, and his habit of rewriting history to suit his narrative made him a figure she came to avoid. Their professional separation, she suggested, was inevitable once she recognized how little he respected her input, despite her role in shaping the musical scene that made his career possible. The third musician on her list was Lou Reed, an artist she admitted to initially admiring from a distance but whom she found personally intolerable upon a brief collaboration attempt arranged in the mid-1970s. Ronstadt described Reed as the most cynical man I ever met, recounting how he sneered at her vocal style and dismissed her catalog as commercial fluff during a lunch meeting meant to explore the possibility of recording a duet. She said Reed had an almost pathological need to provoke and belittle, disguising cruelty as artistic authenticity, and that while she respected the cultural significance of the Velvet Underground, she found Reed's personality so repellent that she walked away from the table with no regrets. The fourth name she named was Bob Seger, a more unexpected entry given their shared roots in Americana and blue-collar rock aesthetics. Yet Ronstadt explained that her aversion to Seger was based not on personal offense but on what she saw as artistic laziness and a kind of formulaic masculinity that dominated the airwaves at the expense of nuance. She criticized what she called his paint-by-numbers lyricism, suggesting that he repeatedly mined the same themes of lost youth and backseat heartbreak without evolving or expanding his musical vocabulary. There was a sameness to it all, she said. After a while, it started to feel like he was writing the same song in different keys. Though she emphasized that Seger was not cruel or vindictive like some of the others on her list, she expressed frustration at the overwhelming reverence he received from critics and fans, believing it came more from nostalgia than from any real artistic innovation. The fifth person on her list, Ted Nugent, drew the strongest language from Ronstadt, who had long opposed his politics and public behavior but had never before detailed their personal clashes. She recounted a shared festival lineup in 1978 where Nugent openly mocked her on stage in front of a live audience, making lewd comments and suggesting that women like her owed their careers to record executives with certain preferences. She described his energy as toxic, violent, and deeply insecure, adding that his guitar playing, while technically skilled, sounded like a weapon, not an instrument. Ronstadt lamented that Nugent's visibility in the music world gave cover to attitudes that were openly hostile to women, minorities, and anyone who didn't fit his worldview, and said she made it a rule from that day forward never to appear on any billing or media platform that included him. The sixth musician on her list was Stephen Stills, a complicated figure for Ronstadt who occupied the same era and often the same spaces. While she spoke glowingly of David Crosby and Graham Nash as generous and emotionally intelligent collaborators, she described Stills as erratic, domineering, and needlessly competitive. She shared a story from a 1974 recording session where Stills insisted on playing every instrument himself despite the presence of other world-class musicians, demanding retakes until everyone in the room was too frustrated to continue. She said that while Stills had undeniable talent and was responsible for some of the era's most enduring songs, he was also deeply mistrustful of women and creative control, once asking her if she really understood chord progressions before trying to rewrite her arrangement. His paranoia, she said, bled into every interaction, turning collaboration into combat and leaving a trail of missed opportunities behind him. The seventh and final name she mentioned was Eric Clapton, a musician she admitted to admiring in her early years but whose later behavior and artistic choices deeply disillusioned her. Ronstadt didn't hold back in her criticism of Clapton's mid-career descent into self-righteous blues worship, which she felt often excluded the black artists who originated the genre, and said that a chance meeting in London in the late 1980s revealed a man so enamored with his own legacy that he was incapable of meaningful dialogue. But beyond the music, what sealed her dislike was Clapton's well-documented racist rant at a 1976 concert, a moment that Ronstadt described as a betrayal of everything music should stand for. Though Clapton later offered a half-hearted apology, Ronstadt never forgot the venom of his words and viewed him thereafter as emblematic of the kind of entitlement and cultural amnesia that plagued much of the white male rock establishment. As she reflected on these names, Ronstadt made it clear that her intention was not revenge or scandal, but honesty. She acknowledged the danger of posthumous reevaluation and the pressure on women to remain gracious in the face of disrespect, even decades after the fact. For so long, I kept quiet because I thought it would seem bitter, she said. But now I see it's not bitterness, it's clarity. And I think I've earned the right to tell the truth. She emphasized that her critiques were grounded in lived experience, not gossip, and that each name she offered came with a story, a moment, or pattern that had left its mark on her career. Despite these conflicts, she expressed gratitude for the majority of musicians she encountered, many of whom she described as generous, curious, and committed to growth. She spoke warmly of Emmylou Harris, Dolly Parton, Ry Cooder, Jackson Browne, and countless others who helped shape the golden era of songwriting and musicianship. But she also warned against the temptation to romanticize an era that, while creatively fertile, was rife with inequality, arrogance, and unchecked egos. In revealing her long-held truths, Ronstadt reasserted not only her place in music history, but also her right to speak plainly and be heard, a final act of artistry in a career defined by its fearless voice.